I remember how I used to think that time spent playing video games was time I'd never get back. That's what everyone told me. Go do something more productive. But then there's this other side of me, the side that can't forget the way a specific place, even a digital one, can become a kind of sanctuary. World of Warcraft did that for me. Every time life shifted, every time I felt the ground move under my feet, WoW was there, not just as a distraction, but as an old friend who never judged, waiting with the same familiar music, ready to kind of hook you back in. All these years later, I find myself in a more stable zone in my life. I'm working a job that feels like it actually fits. I'm married to the person that I've always called my best friend. I've even got a kid, and that's great. In spite of everything, I find my mind wandering back to the dusty corners of Azeroth, thinking about raiding, questing, and chasing old achievements. Nostalgia's powerful like that. It sneaks into your everyday routine, carrying hints of who you used to be. Recently, I became obsessed with the Mage Tower. It's this challenge in WoW where it's basically like a neon sign screaming, "Hey, come in here, you have to prove yourself or you'll get destroyed." A place you walk into certain you've got the skills, only to get your ego shattered in record time. You think that might scare me off, but it did the opposite. It's like trying to master one perfect chord progression on the guitar. The more it fights you, the more you want to crack it open. So I jumped in, had my face planted repeatedly into the ground, and somehow came out of the other side changed. Not just in game, but out here in my real life. Before the Mage Tower, I dabbled in so many different things. I loved picking up new things, that sudden rush, that energy that you get from doing something new. I remember picking up DJing, that would last for a week. Skateboarding, I picked up like 3D software and modeling, and I drew quite a bit, so I always wanted to kind of animate. I did that. None of it stuck, right? Like, you pick it up, you feel like this is electrifying, anything is possible. Then the reality sets in. You need grit. You need to fail 1,000 times. But somewhere around the 500th time, you drop it. And that was me. I'd usually drift away, telling myself I'd come back later, but I rarely did. Then there was this game I'd known since my teenage years. Even when I wasn't actively playing, I'd watch content creators make videos about WoW just to see what was going on. Part of me wanted to keep a lifeline back to Azeroth because it reminded me of an era that's now behind me. And when the Mage Tower re-emerged, I couldn't shake the idea of going all in. I'd heard stories about how brutal it was, how you needed to learn every detail of the encounter or you'd eat the floor, basically. I can't describe how many times I slammed my keyboard in frustration. I never thought a digital demon could make me question my gaming abilities or my sanity so profoundly. The mechanics demanded perfection. Interrupt too late, you're done. Miss a split-second reaction, you're toast. It was like a raw, stripped-down reflection of my own limits every time I failed. It stung, but every time it stung, I was more determined to keep going. Something about that tension, that repeated bash against the wall felt essential. I realized I was actually practicing, not just dabbling, not just sampling, but truly practicing in a way that forced me to confront every gap in my skill. There were nights when I'd be hunched at my desk, the house would be quiet, my coffee would be like really gross and cold, my eyes just completely throbbing, and I'd see the boss, I'd see the health, and I'd be like, this might be it, this might be the time I finally take it down. Then Out of nowhere, I'd fumble and interrupt or mistime a defensive cooldown and watch my character just flop over. In that moment, the tension in my chest felt so real. On some level, it's ridiculous getting this worked up over a fantasy encounter, but it was also so real because it reflected my willingness to endure. I used to live in East London, and things there were different back then. Now it's gentrified, full of cafes and startups, and I still remember when my old neighborhood had an entirely different energy. That transformation always struck me as how time changes everything, often without asking or without even giving you prior warning. You either evolve with that change, or you're left reminiscing about the past. World of Warcraft is a bit like that. Always morphing from expansion to expansion, reinventing itself while still maintaining the core essence of what it is. Each new piece of content is a chance to see how far you've come and how much you're willing to adapt. In my head, the Mage Tower became a metaphor. I couldn't blame it on anyone else. It wasn't about gear or having an overpowered ally. It was about me learning to handle every single phase, every single mechanic. That's the funny thing about solo challenges. There's nowhere to hide. If you fail, it's on you. And if you succeed, well, that's on you too. There's a specific thrill in that moment of personal triumph. When the boss finally collapses and that wave of relief hits, I felt an actual surge of adrenaline. I let out a squeal, but a squeal of happiness at my desk, and it startled me. Afterwards, I realized that during those 2 weeks of obsessive attempts, I learned a lot more than boss mechanics. The constant wipe retry cycle showed me how little I'd been training my own resilience. In everyday life, I have routines, a stable job, a family that means everything, goals that mostly revolve around making sure my kid grows up safe and happy, and that's great. But there's a difference between going through routines and truly pushing yourself to the brink of failure to see what you're made of. Sometimes we need a little chaos and uphill fight that leaves no wiggle room for a half-hearted effort. Friends joked that I was just wasting time because there wasn't a tangible real-world outcome. No pay rise, no physical trophy, just digital pixels of a triumph that wouldn't matter in a year. But I kept thinking, does it really not matter? Because every time I died in that tower and kept going, I was practicing perseverance. I was forcing myself to focus, to problem solve under pressure, to stay calm when the situation got frantic. Those are real life skills. No matter where you learn them, I'm not going to pretend beating the Mage Tower flipped my life upside down. I still clock into the same job. I still wake up in the night when my kid cries. And I still love my partner with the same intensity. But something subtle did change. I felt a spark of the ambition I used to feel when I first picked up a guitar or tried to learn Unreal or Unity. Only this time, I didn't walk away when it got tough. I stuck it out. And once you stick it out in one area, it's easy to stick it out in others. I caught myself experimenting with new creative tools again, actually giving them the time they deserve instead of moving on the moment I felt incompetent. There's a muscle for pushing through, for seeing past the initial wave of failure, and I'd finally started training that. Turns out this silly gaming challenge was like a crash course in real growth. I just had to be stubborn enough to see it through. It also made me reflect on why I keep coming back to WoW specifically. Maybe it's that the game has been around for so long, it's practically an archive of my own memories. I remember playing it as a teen, sneaking sessions late at night when I should have been sleeping, then playing it on and off through different expansions as I got older. Even when I took breaks, I'd still tune in to see what people were saying about the latest patch, the cast of characters, and the setting becoming part of my personal lore. So stepping into the Mage Tower was like returning to a place that knew me in all my phases and was ready to test my limits again. Some people love it for lore, some for the community. For me, it's nostalgia threaded with this thrill of a consistent challenge. And I get it, maybe that's not enough for everyone. Maybe for some, it's just a game they've outgrown, but I found a piece of myself in the process of failing endlessly against an unforgiving boss. I don't think that's a coincidence. All those nights of near silence, except for the clicking of keys, all those moments my heart dropped when I realized I'd made a fatal mistake, those frustrations weren't just fleeting annoyances, they were signs I was engaging deeply, stepping outside of the usual autopilot. When you engage that way in anything, you learn about what makes you tick and how far you'll go to prove you can win. By the time I finally overcame that last encounter, I felt a surge of something close to raw euphoria. It wasn't about the pixels on my screen, it was about realizing I'd actually finished something on my own. I didn't get carried by a group, I didn't rely on an easy trick or out-leveling the content. I just learned over countless attempts exactly how to play better. That sense of accomplishment is addictive. It made me wonder what else in my life I've been avoiding, simply because I'm used to bowing out when the grind gets real. It's like discovering the difference between picking up a guitar and strumming the same 3 chords versus buckling down, practicing scales for hours, and finally playing something that doesn't sound half-baked. Or something that I've done recently and that I recommend highly. It's like taking up cooking and moving past that basic recipe into dishes that demand precise timing and technique. The raw honesty of sustained effort is humbling. It demands that you acknowledge you're a beginner, you're flawed, you're not as good as you thought, but you can improve if you do the work. I think that's what I took away, a respect for the process, for all those small incremental gains you only notice in hindsight. There's something quietly satisfying about repeating a challenge until it shifts from impossible to difficult to done. It's a reminder that your limitations aren't necessarily permanent, they're just untested boundaries, and no boundary gets tested if you walk away at the first sign of struggle. After beating the Mage Tower, I told a friend how good it felt, and they asked me, but what's the point? It's just a transmog set, right? And sure, it might be, but the real reward is that intangible sense of confidence, the knowledge that you can devote yourself to a goal that seems out of reach and eventually claim it. Whenever I start to doubt my ability to learn something new now, I think back to those nights battling a boss mechanic over and over. I remember the taste of defeat, the way the frustration built up, and the unwavering pull to try again. WoW's a funny place because it's both comfort and challenge. It's the memories of my younger self, but it's also this evolving universe that never lets you stagnate. Every expansion, every patch, every new challenge is a chance to see how well you adapt. It changes the way entire zones feel, the way classes play, the way we approach old content. If you think about it, that's kind of how life works. Neighborhoods shift, jobs come and go, relationships deepen. The constants are fewer and fewer. If you're not paying attention, you can blink and feel like you've lost your footing. But you keep going, learning to see the new version of something you used to know so well. Gentrification can make a once familiar street almost unrecognizable. New expansions can make a once familiar game feel brand new. In both scenarios, you can resist or you can embrace it for what it is. Movement, a reminder that nothing stays frozen in one state. And if you let yourself flow with it, you might find something worth cherishing in these new iterations, like a hidden challenge that teaches you more than you ever expected. I'd be lying if I said I don't sometimes wonder about the hours invested into this. Could I have spent them reading a book on self-improvement, learning a new language? Sure, but the Mage Tower felt more direct than any self-help mantra. It forced me into a cycle of fail, analyze, improve. No shortcuts, no fluff. When I saw genuine results, I realized how rarely I'd allowed myself to be that committed. Suddenly, I wanted to bring that level of commitment to other parts of my life too. Now, I'm not saying WoW or any game can magically fix your mindset, but it can reflect it, show you the places where you rely on shortcuts, where you give up too quickly, or where you settle for mediocre. If you push through, you might surprise yourself. You might find you're capable of a lot more than you assumed. And once you get a taste of that, there's a spark that fires up whenever you face the next obstacle, whether it's in a digital realm or in reality. I look back on those 2 weeks of relentless attempts and I can't help but smile. It was painful, it felt stupid at times, but it also lit a fuse I didn't know I needed. Even now, I can almost hear the boss's roar, the clash of spells, the high stakes of the final push. Every detail etched into my mind, reminding me how progress doesn't come easy. It's earned through sweat and resilience. That's why I don't think it was wasted time. Those hours in front of my computer fighting the same challenge over and over again taught me the value of stubborn, meticulous effort. I realized that focusing on one thing and mastering it, even if that thing is a digital encounter, can rewire how you see your own potential. It gave me a reference point, a measuring stick for how far I can go when I decide something really matters. The next time I hesitate before diving headlong into an intimidating project or skill, I'll remember what it felt like to beat the Mage Tower, how it seemed impossible until it wasn't, how a tiny shift in my strategy or a slight improvement in my reaction time could be the deciding factor. That's not just a gaming lesson, it's a life lesson, hidden under layers of fantasy and UI elements, and it's one I'm taking with me long after I've logged out.